Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Food and Mood, presented by registered nutritionist Anastasia Smith. I am Trisha today, and I'll be moderating today's event with Lenka, and we'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A box. And we just have a few household items to go over before we begin. So this event will be recorded and available on our website, and you will not appear in the video. Your audio will be muted during the event, and you can communicate with us through the chat during the presentation, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions for our presenter, please type them there in the Q&A box located at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. And we also have closed captioning, which is available for you. So right now we do have it turned on. If you need to turn it on for yourself, just click on the live transcription icon, which is at the bottom of your screen, and select your preferences. So today our presentation will be around 45 to 50 minutes following a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And if we don't, please email us at programs@abmf.charity, and we'll be sure to get back to you with those questions. And at the end of presentation, we'll be sending a link to the recording as soon as it's available. You can also visit our YouTube channel to access past webinars for your liking. So moving forward, I would like to introduce Diane Boca, founder of the Ashley Boca Mindfulness Foundation, just to say a few words and introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Trisha, and welcome everyone. And I just wanted to say that I created Ashley Boca Mindfulness Foundation to honor the life of my daughter, Ashley, by helping others in their mental health journey. Ashley was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and lost her battle shortly before her 32nd birthday. I don't want others to suffer the same experience as Ashley. And the Ashley Boca Mindfulness Foundation believes that everyone should have access to mental health support they need, when, where, and how they need it. We offer support and educational services to those that are struggling with BPD, as well as the broad spectrum of mental illnesses associated with BPD and their loved ones. Visit us at abmf.charity to learn more. Our facilitator today is Anastasia Smith. She's a registered nutritionist and specializes in nutrition and its role in mental health and brain function. She has been working for a number of years with clients suffering from a wide range of psychiatric conditions. Through her online signature program, Whole Mind Health, she works with clients to help them address the underlying drivers of their symptoms that are preventing them from fully enjoying their lives. We are honored to have you with us today, Anastasia, and I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so as you all know, we're going to be talking about food and mood today and the fascinating link between what we eat and our mental well-being. I'm going to do a very short introduction to myself, and then we'll move on to the kind of core topics that I'm going to be addressing in today's presentation. So as Diane, already mentioned, I'm a registered nutritionist, and I like to deliver my services and my consultation, my clinical practice in a very holistic and integrative way. So what that means is that my aim is to identify the underlying drivers of someone's symptoms and work from the root upwards. And so taking a comprehensive health history is really key to understanding what has happened throughout that person's life, as well as their diet and lifestyle, to formulate a really kind of overall whole understanding of how that person is experiencing health in current time. Functional testing is a key part of my practice. And if you're familiar with functional medicine, which is actually something that was established in the States first, a lot of the tests that I use are a key core part of functional medicine practice. And what this means is that I use testing to really understand what is the underlying trigger for someone's symptoms? Could it be a nutrient deficiency? Could it be a gut bacteria imbalance? There are so many different underlying drivers of health symptoms. And when it comes to mental health, this is also a key part of working with someone through their health, is understanding the root causes of their symptoms. Of course, trauma and many other, environmental kind of causes also do play a role. However, there is a very important physiological aspect of mental health that's important to address as well. So today, within the 45 minutes that I'm going to be speaking, I want to address 3 key topics, which I feel are incredibly important when we are addressing mental health in clinical practice. The first is looking at blood sugar imbalances. The second is specific nutrients for brain health and mental well-being. And the third is looking at the link between the gut and the brain, which is a field of emerging research at the moment. And I'm going to be talking specifically about how we can optimize digestion to optimize our brain health. So starting with the first topic, the most important thing to understand before we talk about specific foods is why what we eat affects our brain. Well, the brain weighs an average of about 1.4 kilograms, which is actually a very small amount when we think about, the overall weight of the body, but it steals about 25% of the body's energy requirement. So it's actually a very energy hungry, energy demanding organ. And the energy that the brain receives is mediated or regulated via our blood sugar levels. So the brain depends on the energy levels that it's receiving through the food that we eat to be kept in tight parameters throughout the day. But when we eat foods that are high in quick releasing sugars, what can happen is our blood sugar levels increase very rapidly, and as a consequence, they will also decrease very rapidly. So that's why it's really important to eat foods that are slow releasing energy foods that are going to keep our blood sugar levels in tight parameters throughout the day, and therefore supply our brain with consistent energy. Now, the brain needs this consistent energy to carry out all of its important functions, such as neurotransmitter production, neurotransmitter signaling, learning and memory, and also cell maintenance, which is actually a really quite a key part of what the brain is kind of directing all of its energy to. The other thing to mention is that when our blood sugar levels are doing this roller coaster throughout the day, what can end up happening is that your nervous system gets triggered into fight or flight too often. So when your blood sugar levels crash, what happens is it stimulates your adrenal glands to produce cortisol and adrenaline, which are these 2 stress hormones and neurohormones that our body uses to prepare the body for a stressful situation. Now, this was a very useful mechanism years and years and years ago when, we were hunter-gatherers. And when our blood sugar levels got too low, this stress hormone production would give us the drive to look for food quickly, and in particular, look for food that was high in quick releasing sugars. Now, back in the day, that would have been something like berries or fruits. But nowadays, we tend to reach for the wrong foods. And what I mean by that is, foods that are high in sugar, things like chocolate, sweets, pastries, cakes, biscuits. And those foods only serve to keep us in this perpetual blood sugar roller coaster. So this kind of inbuilt biological mechanism almost needs to be understood in this way so that we can rationally choose the right choices of food rather than the choices of food that we really want to be reaching out for, which is a sugary food, so that our brain and body are getting this kind of sustainable source of energy. So what are the signs and symptoms of poor blood sugar balance? So anxiety, insomnia, cravings, low mood. These are the kind of symptoms that I see day in, day out in my clinic. And I will always address blood sugar balance as a first port of call, because honestly, it really is amazing how much difference I see in people when we start addressing their blood sugar imbalances. And almost everyone with mental health conditions will have a sensitivity to blood sugar levels peaking and then crashing too quickly. And of course, something to mention as well is that those with mental health conditions also have sensitive nervous systems. And so overstimulating that nervous system through those blood sugar imbalances and stimulating those stress hormone production can, just exacerbate a mental health condition. So what do we need to eat to ensure healthy, stable blood sugar levels? So it's pretty straightforward, and it's things that we already know we should be eating. But I really cannot stress enough that making sure that we're prioritizing protein, fiber, and complex carbohydrates in every single meal that we're eating, as well as essential fats, is really key to the sustainable blood sugar kind of levels throughout the day. Now, protein is something that I want to highlight as probably the most important macronutrient when we're looking at stabilizing blood sugar levels. And that's because it releases its energy very slowly. And that's what we need. We need to have sustainable energy release throughout the day. So I often recommend to my clients to dedicate at least a quarter of their plate or their meal to protein-rich food. And if you are an omnivore, that would mean eating poultry, red meat, fish, eggs, and maybe some dairy. But if you are plant-based, then that would mean eating pulses and whole grains together in order to get that full amino acid profile. And amino acids, by the way, if you're not familiar, are the building blocks of protein. So to get all of the amino acids that we need in our diet, we need to combine the pulses and the whole grains together if you are plant-based. Fiber is key. So fiber basically means lots of vegetables with as many colors as possible. And that's important as well for your gut bacteria. And I'm going to speak about that a bit later on in the presentation. But fiber, again, that demands a little bit more work from your digestive system. And what that means is that the sugars are going to be released more slowly, more gradually from the fiber that you're eating. And that means a sustainable source of energy for your brain and body. Complex carbohydrates over simple carbohydrates. So what this means is that we're choosing whole grain varieties over simple or refined grain varieties. And also pseudo grains like quinoa and millet, which are naturally gluten-free as well, which is an added plus if you are intolerant to gluten, as well as root vegetables. So things like, your starchy tubers like parsnips and sweet potatoes and butternut squash, pumpkin, those sorts of things. Those are excellent sources of complex, slow-releasing carbohydrates. And then finally, essential fats, essential fatty acids, things like oily fish, eggs, nuts and seeds, avocado, olive oil, coconut oil. All of these different fibers, proteins, complex carbohydrates and fats all together will give you a very sustainable source of energy throughout the day and will prevent that blood sugar roller coaster. So just a side note on fiber. So here in the UK, our government or our kind of health organization, the NHS, it recommends a minimum of 30 grams of fiber a day, and many of us aren't getting that amount. So I would imagine that that's similar in the States. And this is what 30 grams of fiber looks like. So it's important to have this kind of visual reference to know exactly what does that mean? How much is 30 grams? So basically my rule of thumb is just to make sure that you're getting a really good variety of vegetables at both lunch and dinner. And if you can at breakfast as well, that would be even better. And you would undoubtedly hit that 30 gram or if not higher mark of fiber a day. Now, what do we need to avoid to prevent these blood sugar imbalances? Well, it's straightforward as well as the other slide of what you need to be including. It's things that we already know that we shouldn't really be eating much of. But what the key thing to know with these foods is that your digestive system doesn't have to do very much to break down the sugars in these foods. So what happens is that the sugars get dumped into your blood circulation too quickly, and that as a consequence leads to that blood sugar roller coaster. So avoid anything with added sugar, like the baked goods that I was talking about earlier on, like pastries, chocolate, confectionery, fizzy drinks, processed grains, like the refined grains. Processed foods as well. Alcohol is a pure form of sugar, so we need to be careful with that. And also, in addition to alcohol, something also to take note of with alcohol is that it can have a very negative impact on your sleep. So it will actually prevent you from entering into deep sleep cycle, which is a type of sleep that we need to be getting enough of every night. so that we feel okay the next day. And research shows that poor sleep, because of alcohol intake, can actually make you a little bit insulin resistant the next day, which means that you're going to have trouble with extracting energy from your food appropriately. Fruit juices and dried fruit, something that you might think, oh, that's interesting. That looks like it's healthy. Why is it on this slide? Well, fruit juices are a pure form of sugar, and that's simply because the fiber has been removed from the fruit. So eating an apple is very different to drinking the juice from an apple, and that's because the fiber would have been removed, and that fiber is key to preventing this blood sugar roller coaster. Dried fruit is a little bit different to fruit juice. It's a little bit less high in glycemic load, meaning that it will, won't be as such a high impact on your blood sugar levels, but the drying process of fruit actually concentrates the sugars in it. So we do need to be a little bit careful with dried fruit. Obviously, we can have some in our diet, but we don't want to be relying on it too much as a snack, for example. And then finally, caffeine. So caffeine doesn't have sugar in it outright, but what caffeine does is it stimulates your stress hormone production. So that's adrenaline and cortisol. So we've already spoken about these two hormones in relation to your blood sugar levels. But something to take note of is that when our blood sugar levels crash, the cortisol and adrenaline are produced, and what that does is it pulls the glycogen stores from your liver and converts that into readily available sugar into your bloodstream. And so caffeine can do the same thing by that stimulation of those stress hormones. So we don't want to exacerbate these stress hormones too much, especially if we already suffer with anxiety and depression. Something that I really try to drill into my clients is always read the ingredients in every single product that you buy and try to prioritize nutrient value over calorie density. So I know that many of us are scaremongered into buying low calorie foods. And so therefore we might feel more comfortable with looking at packages with, clearly labeled calories in food packages. But the problem with this is that we're then going to be resorting to foods that have been processed inevitably, and marketing can be very misleading. So I don't know if you have Kellogg's in the States, I'm pretty sure you do, but just this as an example, we see here 90 calories per bar. We see that it's a good source of fiber. It's got natural flavoring in there of blueberry. So of course, if you're not too knowledgeable about nutrition, you're going to think, oh, this looks healthy. I'll take this to have for my mid-morning snack or my mid-afternoon snack, for example. But then you flip the packet and you look at the ingredient list and you see, oh, there's quite a bit of sugar in here. And if you don't know that there's actually quite a few names for sugar, then you might not even realize that there's a lot of sugar in there, apart from the couple of instances where you do see sugar in the ingredient list. So maltodextrin, corn syrup, fructose, dextrose, dextrin, sorbitol, these are all forms of sugar. And food manufacturers, by law, are supposed to label their ingredient list by order of amount. So they're a bit sneaky. They try and get more sugar in there, dotted down the ingredient list by using different types of sugars. And this is just a really key example. So watch out for these different labels for sugars, because sugar has many different faces, many different labels, and it's always important to read the ingredient list, whatever you do, and choose food in its natural form as much as you possibly can. Okay, so moving on to specific nutrients for brain health and mental well-being. So I find in clinical practice that actually one of the easiest ways to recognize nutrient deficiency or nutrition deficiency is not from a change in body activity, but actually from a change in mental functioning. So typical symptoms like anxiety, brain fog, low mood, mood swings, these can sometimes be examples or reflections of nutrient deficiencies. And there are some key nutrients that I'm going to be talking about. And the first thing is actually a macronutrient, so fat. Fat is incredibly important for the brain. And then in this fat scaremongering society that we live in, we can sometimes be drawn to buying low fat products and be a bit scared of having some saturated fat. And of course, we do need to be a bit careful about saturated fat. So that's fat that you normally find in things brain is heavily reliant on the right types of fat. So 60% of the brain is fat. And there are some key fats that are actually important for the integrity and the structure of your brain. And research shows integrity and the structure of your brain. And research shows that the types of fat that you have in your diet can have a direct impact on how your brain is structured and its integrity. So on the right here, I've just got an example of a brain cell. And you'll see here there's a cell membrane, there's a myelin sheath, and these are two key areas where fat can play a really important role. So we need the cell membranes of our brain cells to be nice and fluid. They need to have a tight integrity, and this is key for neurotransmitter signaling. So where there are symptoms of brain fog, poor memory, poor cognitive function, normally there's an issue with cell membrane health because the signaling isn't happening so efficiently. And then another thing is the myelin sheath. So this is this insulating layer of the nerve. Think of it as, for example, if you're looking at a cable and you're looking at the outer kind of plastic coating of that cable, that's what the myelin sheath is for our brain cells. So it helps to insulate our nerves and helps with those neurotransmitter signaling to happen efficiently and quickly. So what fats do we need to be eating to support these functions? So monounsaturated fats, such as those found in things like extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, and avocado are key. Not only do these sources of fats have a high amount of antioxidants, which is really important for our brain, but they also contain a type of fat that can help support the production of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter in our brain that's associated to learning and memory. So these are key for that type of function. Omega-3 is perhaps the most important fat when it comes to brain health. And that's because omega-3 is actually made up of two different types of fatty acids. One is EPA, the other is DHA. Now, EPA is essential for preventing neuroinflammation, and mental health conditions are often symptoms of neuroinflammation. So this is actually really important when it comes to addressing mental health, is making sure that we're preventing inflammation in the brain, and EPA in omega-3 can help to prevent that inflammation and quench that inflammation. DHA is the other component, and DHA plays more of a structural role in the brain. So again, it helps with this cell membrane fluidity and integrity. And it's particularly important in the diet of babies, and also when women are pregnant, it's important to be getting lots of omega-3 for fetal brain growth. Now, you can get omega-3 through plant-based sources, but in a different form. So the omega-3 that you find in sources like chia seeds and walnuts and flax seeds is actually alpha-linoleic acid. And what happens is when you ingest that type of fatty acid, your brain will convert it eventually to EPA and DHA, which you find readily available in foods like oily fish. Now, something I want to highlight is that that conversion is processed through an enzyme, and that enzyme isn't incredibly efficient. So this is why, if you are plant-based, it's important to be getting these sources of omega-3 in your diet on a daily basis. And you can also think about supplementing with a plant-based source of omega-3 like algae, or even flaxseed oil or hemp seed oil. Phospholipid-rich foods, such as those in organ meats, eggs, shellfish, soybeans, these are also key nutrients or key lipids of fats to help with this cell membrane fluidity and structure. So all of these fats together are going to help with that cell signaling and that neurotransmitter transport and metabolism, which is really important for mental health. Now, what fats do we need to be avoiding? So damaged fats are basically vegetable oils like sunflower oil or rapeseed, which would be canola oil for you guys, I believe, corn oil, which have been heated to high temperatures. So these types of unsaturated fats are very volatile when in exposure to high temperatures, oxygen, and light. And that's because they're unsaturated. So the more unsaturated a fat is, the more volatile it's going to be to high temperatures. So you don't want to cook with these oils. I recommend cooking instead with an oil like avocado oil, which is higher in saturated fat and has a higher smoking point, meaning that it won't burn so easily. As well as things like ghee, which is a clarified butter or butter in itself. Coconut oil as well is a little bit better. These are much better options than vegetable oils like sunflower oil or canola oil, for example. And then processed fats, you want to avoid as much as possible because these will often contain trans fats. And trans fats are basically a very inflammatory type of fat that get produced when fats are hydrogenated. So that basically means an unsaturated fat like sunflower oil, for example, that has been industrially altered so that it's solid at room temperature. So we want to avoid those fats as much as possible. And we often find them in things like margarine and pastries and other baked goods. Now, talking specifically about amino acids. So amino acids are actually the building blocks of protein. And we know that we need to be having protein for our muscle strength, for our growth, for example, if you're a child. But many of us don't know that amino acids are actually the building blocks for your neurotransmitters. So your neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, GABA, noradrenaline, melatonin, these are all made from amino acids. And these are just two key examples. So tryptophan is a key precursor amino acid for serotonin and melatonin. And tyrosine is a precursor amino acid to dopamine. And you can see here, this is the enzymatic pathway of how these amino acids get converted eventually down into neurotransmitters. So these are all, really key for our mental health. And these are also neurotransmitters that many psychiatric medications will also focus on. So we need to make sure that we're getting enough of these proteins in our diet to help with this neurotransmitter balance and neurotransmitter production. Vitamin D. So vitamin D, we know of more so for its benefits with our immune system or with our bone health, but vitamin D is also incredibly important for serotonin production and serotonin signaling. So it's no surprise that many people suffer with seasonal affective disorder during the winter months because we have lack of sunshine, we have a lack of exposure to sunlight during those winter months. And so this is why it's a good idea to supplement with vitamin D, especially during the colder months of the year. Now, that would be different for different people. So it's really important that you're testing your vitamin D levels and making sure that you're supplementing with the right amount. Some people who are incredibly deficient will probably need a prescription vitamin D, which means that they'll be given a very, very high dose for a short period of time, and then they'll be given a maintenance dose for a longer period of time. Now, here in the UK, our government or our UK Department of Health advises the following guidelines. So it might be different for you guys in the States, but let me tell you that the majority of people that I see in practice who I am testing for vitamin D are normally between 25 and 50, or maybe sometimes between 50 and 70. So between 50 and 70 is regarded as sufficient. So if you go to your doctor and they test your vitamin D levels, they won't flag it up unless you are below 50. And that's not great, because we don't just want to be preventing illness. We want to be thriving. We want to be, feeling our best self. And so sufficient levels aren't going to cut it. We need to be getting our levels to an optimal range, which is between 70 and 100 OL per litre. So use this as your guideline, and you want to be aiming for that kind of bracket, and always test. That's the most important thing. Magnesium. Magnesium is a mineral that I see very often deficient in my clients, and there's a variety of theories for that. There's a theory that we don't get enough of magnesium in our food because of soil depletion or mineral depletion in our soils. So we're not actually able to get enough because of that, but also because stress depletes magnesium. So Magnesium is an incredibly important nutrient for many things. It plays a role in quite a large amount of enzymes in the body. But when it comes to the nervous system, it's a key ingredient to help balance the nervous system and to help prevent stress. So one of the key functions of magnesium is that it inhibits excitatory neurotransmitters and prevents anxiety through that mechanism. So our brain has both excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters, and it's really important to have a balance between the two. And in cases of anxiety, mood swings, psychosis, we see an overexcitation of neurotransmitters, and that can actually lead to neuroinflammation. So magnesium can help prevent this overexcitation, and it can help to stimulate the inhibitory neurotransmitter, which is GABA, our brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter. It also suppresses the release of cortisol, our primary stress hormone. So if we are under a lot of stress and we are perpetually, pumping out too much of this cortisol, or our cortisol rhythm is unbalanced, then magnesium can play a role in helping to regulate cortisol production and to suppress the over release of cortisol. Cortisol also can damage the hippocampus, which is the seat of our learning, memory, and emotional health of our brain. So in cases of chronic stress, we can often see that the hippocampus becomes damaged, and magnesium is amazing because it helps to protect the hippocampus from chronic stress. So where can we find magnesium? Well, these are the key sources of magnesium that I recommend. So cacao obviously is what we find in chocolate, and I'm not endorsing going to buy sugary, typical commercial chocolate. I'm trying to encourage you to buy plain cacao, cacao powder, and you can, add that to your smoothies. You can add that to, if you're having something like a porridge in the morning with lots of nuts and seeds, and blueberries, you can also add a little bit of cacao to that as well. You can have really good quality chocolate as well. So anything upwards of 70% will have more of a therapeutic function than, just a regular, very sugary milk chocolate. And I always recommend to try and get raw chocolate as well. So we've got lots of lovely brands here in the UK that sell raw chocolate bars, and I'm sure you have lots of that in the States as well. So try and choose that instead. Nuts and seeds, almonds, Brazil nuts, cashews are key sources of magnesium. Tofu, chickpeas, oily fish like salmon, for example, and also avocado. Now, iron and B12 are really important for transporting oxygen around the body. So they play a key role in building healthy red blood cells, and particularly hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrying molecule that we find in our red blood cells. So without these two nutrients, our red blood cells cannot carry enough oxygen around the body. And our brain is highly dependent on a lot of oxygen. So it's not just energy hungry, it's also oxygen hungry. So we need enough of iron and B12 to prevent things like anemia. And interestingly, symptoms of anemia can often be similar to mental health conditions like depression. So low mood, fatigue, brain fog, these are really key symptoms of depression, for example. So it's important to make sure that you're not anemic. They also play a really important role in neurotransmitter production. So they're actually cofactor nutrients in neurotransmitter production. And they play a role in the myelination of our nerves. So again, thinking back to that myelin sheath, the iron and B12 play an important role in preventing the breakdown of that myelin sheath. So it's important to note that with iron, there are two different types: heme iron, which you'll find in animal products, and non-heme iron, which you'll find in plant-based foods. So, vegetables like green leafy veg and pulses. Now, there is a key difference between heme iron and non-heme iron, and that is with non-heme iron, it's a little bit more tricky to absorb and assimilate. And the reason for that is that in foods like pulses and whole grain, we'll often find high levels of phytates or phytic acid, which is a compound that actually inhibits absorption of minerals. So in order to mitigate that, we can soak our pulses or soak our whole grains for a few hours, and you can also speed up the process of this removal of phytates by adding a splash of raw apple cider vinegar. So that's a really good way of making these foods like pulses and whole grains higher in readily available minerals and other nutrients, so we can digest and assimilate them more efficiently. The other thing is to eat iron-rich foods with vitamin C-rich foods. This also helps with absorption. So things like eating pulses with peppers or leafy greens or tomatoes, for example, is a good approach to take. Now, B12 you will find readily available in animal products, but unfortunately not so readily available or non-existent in actual fact in plant-based foods. So if you are plant-based, you will need to eat fortified foods or supplements. So fortified foods like cereals, non-dairy milks, vegan cheeses, these are all foods that we will find added extra kind of B12 in there. You can also supplement with B12, and that would probably be also an important thing to do if you are fully vegan. But if you're not, you're probably getting enough if you are eating animal products in your daily diet. Now, finally, moving on to the link between the brain and the gut. So a healthy adult is said to carry tens of trillions of microbes or microorganisms in our gut, in the gut. So, and that can weigh between 1.5 kilograms to 2 kilograms. Now, you're probably wondering, why is this important for my mental health? Well, in our gut, we have something called the enteric nervous system, and it's often referred to as a second brain. And that's because the gut is the only organ to boast its own independent nervous system. So this is a nervous system that works independently from the central nervous system, which includes the spinal cord and the brain. And this is an intricate network of 100 million neurons embedded in the gut wall. And the bacteria in your gut, or the microbiome, which refers to all the different types of microbes in your gut, they play a really important role in communicating with that nervous system, which consequently communicates with the brain. So there's this bi-directional relationship or bi-directional communication happening between the brain and the gut. And this is actually communicated via this long nerve called the vagus nerve, which connects the brain and the gut. And again, our gut microbiome play a really important role in that communication and supporting that communication. And here are just some of the key things that our gut microbiome does to influence our brain health and mental well-being. So up to 90% of serotonin and other important neurotransmitters like dopamine and GABA are actually created in the gut by bacteria. They're also altered in the gut by bacteria. And research shows that the neurotransmitters that are created by bacteria can actually influence the neurotransmitters or your neurochemistry, so in the brain. So this is really, really fascinating and a fascinating area of research at the moment, which is constantly evolving, and there's still a lot that we don't know, but these are just some key initial signs that what we eat and how that influences our gut microbiome can play an important role in our mental health. Bacteria also modulate inflammation in the gut, and that has a direct impact on the brain. And research shows that inflammation in the gut caused by gut bacteria imbalances, so that's when we start to favor the growth and nourishment of the unfavorable gut microbes, as opposed to the more friendly or more favorable gut microbes, that can lead to inflammation. And that inflammation can be transported or communicated to the brain via this vagus nerve that connects the two organs. Bacteria also produce fatty acids, like short-chain fatty acids as an example. And these short-chain fatty acids, they have been shown to increase neurotrophic factors in the brain, which stimulate neuroplasticity. So neurotrophic basically means it relates to the growth of new brain cells. And one example is a factor called the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is a really key compound that we need to encourage as much of. It's the most researched neurotrophic factor in the brain. There are others. But a key takeaway is that the bacteria in our gut are in charge of producing these fatty acids that consequently increase things like BDNF in the brain, and BDNF stimulate neuroplasticity, so that's the growth of new brain cells, as well as new neural pathways, and also help to prevent neuroinflammation. So really fascinating. So what can we do to support our gut microbiome and to support the growth of the friendly microbes as opposed to the unfriendly microbes? The first thing to do is to eat a rainbow. So I mentioned this earlier on with when I was talking about blood sugar imbalances. So making sure that you are eating a wide variety of different fibers and different colored vegetables. So that means that you're going to be exposing your gut bacteria to different types of fibers. That's really key. So that's going to help nourish diversity in your gut. So it's really important actually that we're getting that we have a diverse range of microbes. The more diversity, the more better health outcomes. And that's what research is showing, basically, that the more diversity, the better. And actually, over the past few decades, research shows that diversity is actually decreasing. And so by eating a wide variety of different types of plant fibers is really key for encouraging that diversity. Eating fermented foods like sauerkraut and natural yogurts, kefir, which is a fermented type of milk, but you can also buy water kefir and you can buy coconut milk kefir, kombucha, and pickled raw vegetables. These are all sources of probiotics, and probiotics are referring to friendly bacteria or lactic acid producing bacteria. Now, these lactic acid producing bacteria are part of the lactobacilli family of bacteria, and there's a lot of research behind the lactobacilli family of bacteria. And we know that this strain of bacteria can help a lot with our overall health and mental well-being. So eating these foods, on a frequent basis can help keep that lactobacilli family nice and robust in your gut. Avoiding processed foods, avoiding sugary foods, research shows that that is a killer for your gut bacteria. So that's going to encourage the wrong types of microbes, and in particular things like yeast and fungi, which we don't want too much of. So avoiding those foods as much as you can. And then finally, a lifestyle factor here, which isn't obviously nutrition related, but it's really important to highlight because there is actually a lot of research to show that engaging in stress relieving activities like exercise, yoga, and mindfulness, for example, can really help to stimulate the growth of the right microbes, the friendly microbes, and keep inflammation at bay. So stress isn't great for our gut microbiome, so we want to avoid stress as much as we possibly can. And then finally, avoiding unnecessary medications. So there is a time and a place for medication, of course. Antibiotics can be life-saving, of course, and we really do need to take them sometimes. However, there is a time and a place, and I do think that sometimes antibiotics can be handed out too freely, and this can have a very negative long-term impact on your gut microbiome. So it's just important to make sure that every time you do have to take these, you're thinking twice and thinking, is this absolutely necessary? Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. I hope that was interesting. I hope that the information was useful for you. And I will endeavor to answer all of your questions.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Anastasia.
You're welcome.
Yes, we'll now enter the Q&A section. I think the food groups that what's put out by the UK, I think it's very similar to what we do here in Canada.
Yes, I thought that would be the case.
Yeah, our moderators will take on and present you with the questions that's come in from our audience.
Sure.
And, if you do not get your questions answered now, not to worry. Please email them to programs@abmf.charity and we will revert back to them as soon as possible. So don't fret if you don't get your questions answered today. So I'll pass that over to you, Tricia and Lenka.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anastasia. So we do have a few questions. So One person says, thank you, this is amazing. And do you have any example of a weekly diet plan that, like examples of what a weekly diet plan would look like?
I actually have, so on my website, I have a 5-day food diary sorry, not food diary, meal plan that I offer for free and anyone can go on there and download it basically. So the aim of this meal plan was so that it would contain all of these important nutrients for our brain health and mental well-being. And it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there is some interesting information at the beginning as well. So feel free to download that. You can go ahead and download that, and my website is just there at the bottom. But that would be a really key example. Now, one thing I have to say is that it's not a vegetarian meal plan. So if you are vegetarian, apologies. I am working on developing a vegetarian meal plan, but my feeling and my kind of experience in clinical practice is that normally the flexitarian approach is much better than eliminating whole food groups, especially when it comes to brain health. The brain is very reliant on B12 and omega-3 and iron, which unfortunately you can find just more readily available in animal foods. So yes, please do go ahead and download that.
Okay, awesome. Okay, next question. If taking vitamins, what is the best time of day to take, let's say B12, magnesium, or an iron supplement? And is it okay to take them all at the same time?
I would always recommend that you take all of your supplements with a meal. That's really important for absorption, unless you're taking an amino acid. So something to take into consideration with amino acids, I know that's not part of the question, but I thought I'd just add this in, is that amino acids compete for absorption with other amino acids. So if you are taking, for example, a 5-HTP or a tryptophan to support your serotonin levels, then you want to make sure you're taking that with just a carbohydrate snack on an empty stomach, away from a meal that's more kind of comprehensive and includes other nutrients in there. Now with iron, iron is really important to have with vitamin C, as I mentioned earlier on. So if you are taking iron, make sure that you're taking that with a vitamin C, and that will help with absorption as well. And in terms of time of day, there isn't a particular time of day. The only thing I would say is that vitamins, then you want to make sure you're taking that at the beginning of the day, because they're quite energy producing. So you don't really want to be taking that at the end of the day, because obviously you want to be sleeping. So that's the only thing that I would say.
Next question. So as someone on a typical North American diet, what would be the simplest thing one can change in their diet to feel better the fastest? And what would have the biggest...
So I'm assuming that a typical North American diet is one that is low in vegetables, perhaps, and pretty high in processed foods. Is that the case, or am I being incredibly judgmental? Yeah, so I mean, I think that the simplest thing would be to try and get in some more plant fibers. That's really the simple way of going about it. Aim for at least, if you're coming from a very typical North American diet, then try and aim for at least a quarter of your plate with maybe 2 or 3 different types of vegetables. That's probably the simplest way forward initially, but of course gradual changes. So there'll be more changes that need to be made moving on from there.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is there any research done on comparing conventional and organic grown food? And do people who eat organic, locally grown food really feel better, or is it just a placebo effect?
Yeah, excellent question. There is some research, however, it's as far as I remember, and I did do some research on this maybe a couple of years ago. Now, when it comes to the nutrient kind of content of organic grown food in comparison to conventional, there is a little bit of research that shows that organic grown food is higher in nutrient content, obviously particularly micronutrients. Now, obviously, with people that have sensitivities to things like pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, eating organic grown food is probably a better approach to take. You want to obviously minimize your impact to these sorts of chemicals as much as possible. And I often find that women that struggle with hormone imbalances, things like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, they're really quite sensitive to these sorts of chemicals. And so trying to avoid them as much as possible is actually better. And yes, eating organic, locally grown food would be the better approach. It might be a placebo effect. The placebo effect is incredibly powerful. But whatever makes you feel good is great, you know. Eating organic and eating locally grown can be very expensive, and I do understand that. So one thing that you can do is you can look up the Dirty Dozen, and I can't remember what the website is now, but if you Google the Dirty Dozen, you will find which vegetables and fruits you must absolutely buy organic if you're trying to avoid as much damage as possible. And so these are the types of fruits and vegetables that are a little bit more vulnerable to pesticide and insecticide kind of contamination.
Okay, wow. Okay, next question. A carnivore diet has grown more popular recently thanks to some promotion. So some of their claims sounds too good to be true. What is your point of view on this topic, and why do doctors are so hesitant to recommend it to more people?
Yes, the carnivore diet has become very, I suppose, more spoken about, and I think I know who you're talking about in terms of who's promoting it. I do think there is something to be said for eating a diet that is high in in animal products, like, you know, well-sourced meat and well-sourced poultry and fish, organ meats. Now, organ meats are a food that we don't tend to have very much in our diet nowadays, and we used to have a lot more of those sorts of foods in our diet. We used to have more of a nose to tail diet, and organ meats have an incredible profile of nutrients that we will struggle to get in muscle meat, for example. So I do think there is something to be said for that. However, what I would worry about is the lack of phytonutrients, the lack of antioxidants, polyphenols, flavonoids, these sorts of plant compounds that have been shown to play a really important role in our overall health. And so obviously eating a carnivore diet, you would not be having any of those types of nutrients and compounds. I think that being just balanced is best. We as humans like things to be black or white, and often the gray area is not as trendy or sexy or attractive, but actually it's probably a better approach to take than going to an extreme of going carnivore or an extreme of going vegan. So yes, I do think there's something to be said for it, but I do worry about the lack of antioxidant, lack of plant fibers and plant compounds in there.
Okay, I think we have one last question here.
Sure.
So can you explain a little bit more about protein from animal products versus plant-based, and if is one more healthier than the other?
Sorry, can you repeat that question just one more time, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So can you explain a little bit more about protein from animal products versus plant-based products, and if one is more healthier than the other?
Sure. I mentioned earlier on that if you are plant-based, it's important to combine pulses and whole grains together, because that way you would be getting the full amino acid or essential amino acid profile in one go rather than separately. And that's because so we have, I think, a maximum of 21 amino acids, and around 9 of them are essential. And so we need to be getting those amino acids in our diet because we cannot manufacture them in our body like the other amino acids. And in animal sources like meats and fish and poultry and dairy, we find all of those essential amino acids in one go. Whereas in plant-based sources, we'll only get some of those amino acids in one go. So by combining whole grains and combining pulses together, we will be able to get that full amino acid profile. So that's the difference between the two. I would say that if you do have problems with digestion, then you might struggle to extract and absorb the amino acids from plant sources as well as you might do through animal products. But if you are healthy and you don't have any health problems and your digestion is working just fine, then, you know, relying on getting your amino acids through a plant, you know, plant sources like whole grains and pulses mixed together and hopefully soaked as well, because that can also help with the absorption process. That's also fine. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. That looks like that's all the questions for now.
Wow.
Sure.
Our Q&A session here. Thank you everyone for your questions.
Thank you.
Sure.
This has been really great. Thank you so much, Anastasia.
Yeah, you're so welcome, and I hope that everyone found it useful. And again, if you have any questions, please do, you know, send a question to me at my email address, which you'll find there on the slide. You can find me on Instagram as well if you want to follow me on there. I'm always sharing lots of information on there too. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, and have a lovely afternoon.
Yes, you as well. And thank you to the attendees for joining us today and participating in this discussion. We appreciate you being here. Remember to follow us on social media and check out our website for more webinars and events. Our next webinar is scheduled for June the 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Shake the dirt off and move forward. And this is presented by motivational speaker Michael Atterbury, who will be sharing his personal story of trauma and shows us how we can either make trauma let us thrive or destroy us. So we're looking forward to that. It should be pretty exciting. And we're also running an event right now, Tulips for Ashley, a perennial exchange fundraiser. So check us out on abmf.charity to get some more information on our coming events. Thanks again, guys.
Great, thank you.
Stay safe.
Everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.